Welcome to the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast. I'm Greg Schenkel, President of Unique Training and Development and Frontline Leadership Systems. And as always, our mandate here at the AOP is to bring you value that you can use to accelerate your career progression, to make projects that you're running run a little smoother, basically get more done with less stress. And today's episode is brought to you by a new topic that we've been recently introducing to some of our clients. It's called Data-Driven Performance Conversations. And manufacturing operations and distribution operations have more KPIs and more data than ever before. But what we want is to equip the leaders to have conversations with their teams about those results and do it in a way that, of course, drives better performance in the long term. So that's just one of the features of some of our training programs. And of course, if that interests you, or just basic frontline leadership, or our new plant manager effectiveness program, just reach out to us through our website at uniquedevelopment.com. I'm excited to talk to today's guest, Michael Farrell. And it turns out, Mike might not even remember this, but we met probably about 13 years ago. And Mike is the Executive Vice President of the Paperboard Manufacturing Division at a company called Graphic Packaging. He was super impressive to me when I met him, and at that point he was probably 2 or 3 layers lower than his current position, so this is amazing to see him get this promotion. And as the Executive Vice President of Paperboard Manufacturing, Mike actually oversees 5 paper mills for Graphic Packaging. Now, if you haven't heard of Graphic Packaging, let me just explain that this is a company that does $8.8 billion worth of net sales. It does business in 26 different countries, has more than 3,000 customers, 23,000 employees, and approximately $1.7 billion in adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or EBITDA. And really, Graphic Packaging, think of it as all those corrugated boxes that obviously big companies like Walmart need to recycle, along with what you put in your recycling blue box program, eventually goes back to Graphic Packaging. And they basically turn that into new cereal boxes and other packaging solutions for customers. So it's an amazing thing because the world is trying to get away from these single-use plastics, and Graphic is well positioned to help achieve those sustainability results. The really cool thing that Mike's been overseeing in his division is bringing a new plant in Waco, Texas online, and it's one of the first of its kind to be built in North America. So now Mike oversees this portfolio of 5 paper mills. They produce about 4 million tons of paperboard a year out of those mills, and Mike himself has had a great track record of results, including the startup of the Waco mill, which was a $700 million capital investment. And from profit and loss accountability to process improvement, Mike is a leader who captured both increased efficiency and productivity. That's a long intro, but Mike Farrell, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be with you.
Yeah. So, Mike, again, what's impressive about when I think back is, I believe when we first met, you were probably, maybe walk us through a little bit about where your journey took you within Graphic Packaging.
Sure. So I've been with Graphic now, this will be my 20th year. I joined originally in our Middletown, Ohio recycled mill. Then I went down to West Monroe to be the manufacturing manager down there.
Yeah.
Which is where we met.
That's where we met. That's right. Yeah. And that was that was probably the biggest mill, I think, within West Monroe is the biggest, or was the biggest mill at the time. I've been to Middletown as well. For the audience to know, is the reason Mike and I met is we were delivering our frontline leadership program across the operations, and that included the paperboard mills. So, okay, so you moved from West Monroe into what position?
From West Monroe, then I went into a multi-site responsibility, so I became the vice president of our recycled mill division, which at the time had 6 mills in it, and did that for almost 5 years, and then took a little detour, went into supply chain for about 6 months. It was supposed to be a 2 or 3 year gig, but my former boss, Al Nichols, who retired, and then I was promoted into this role 8 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and having met, and congratulations, having met Al Nichols before, and knowing you more than I know of him, but I think your styles are a little bit different. I was just curious how whether that took a while for people to adjust to just the leadership styles, not taking nothing away from Al, but you're kind of
Yeah.
a new generation of leader, I think.
Yeah, it was a transition for the division and for myself, frankly. When it's funny, a bit of a leadership divergent story here, but when I first took over the recycled mill division, I was trying to do it like Al did it, and that really wasn't my style, so it wasn't genuine. So it took me a little while to go, wait a minute, if I'm going to do this, I need to do it my way and with the way I believe things should be done. And no, Al was absolutely the right guy for the time. He's been a great mentor to me, but people have different styles and different ways of getting things done.
Yeah,
So I had to come into my own to do that, and that was a real learning for me. And I share that story with a lot of the people that that I help mentor as well. Is you have to be true to yourself. You have to find the way that you can get it done and be effective.
yeah, I think that's a great lesson, and honestly, I think even when I think of people who do what I do speaking or training, I think that initially they start by mimicking someone else who they see as having been successful, and then they
Right.
discover, well, then they actually begin to trust their own voice and their own authenticity, and then they bring that into their style, and then they really kind of move from, I guess it would be almost a version of imposter syndrome to kind of coming into their own, and then they really start to perform well, right? And
Yeah,
bring the
absolutely. You got
value.
to get a few wins, build your confidence up.
Yeah. So, one of the things that, well, you must be just coming off a bit of a stressful high, I would say, having just done this really
Yes.
large capital project, because, even in reading some of the publicly available information, like this was a significant capital investment for Graphic. And in fact, because it's now sort of more in the rear view mirror,
hmm
it's going to free up a lot of good operating cash flow going forward, according to the investor presentations that I saw. But what is one of the key successes? You can certainly mention Waco if that's the one that comes to mind, but
hmm
what's something that you counted as a win that did help you sort of come into your own, knowing that I'm onto something, even if it was in a role that was even before the one you're in now?
Yeah, I think it really starts at the beginning of my career, which was really spending time on the floor, really understanding the whole system of how either a paper machine or a boiler or a mill works, really getting the fundamental knowledge of that, and also understanding how the manufacturers designed this equipment. Because typically I've worked in older mills, and along the way over a 50, 60, 70 year time span, a lot of times people have changed the way things were set up, the way things were meant to be is no longer the way they are. And honestly, I've made a career of putting things almost back to the OEM specifications
Yeah.
and making them run like they originally were intended.
Yeah, so
Excuse
the
me,
so
intended to.
so the lesson there, I think, and I've seen it now. Actually, Mike, I fell into the trap, and I'm not sure if you ever have in your career, or you see people maybe in the operation who fall into this trap. For a long time, I didn't even go and visit customers. I just, it's so easy to get on
Yeah.
Zoom calls or Teams calls, and then I started going back on the road and going out to the factory and actually walking the floor with the supervisors to see their reality. And I
hmm
think you'd probably agree that an executive trap you have to watch out for is not thinking that you can just manage by remote control and manage by the spreadsheet, even though I'm sure as you get to a higher level like yours, you're monitoring these statistics that kind of give you an inkling of what might be going on, but then you almost have to go and see firsthand. It sounds like that's the lesson that you learned.
I travel 40 weeks a year, Greg, because all of the action happens, the important things happen in the mills, not in an office in Atlanta.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I've noticed that, and so this would be just a good tip for anyone in our audience. In this world where so much of the data, and especially the manufacturing data, is coming to you through the various ERP systems, remember that you need to, I mean, it's a fundamental thing. I know the concept is called Gemba, which is basically go to the scene where it's happening, because that's when you can really start to understand it. Plus, it gives you a chance to interact with the people closest to the work who are actually delivering those results. Um, Is there, Mike, even though you've had this success early on of just knowing that it was important to be with the people, was there a lesson that you gleaned from something that wasn't going as well as you had hoped?
Yeah, I think part of that is growing into your role, but early on, I can vividly remember running a chemical trial on a paper machine, and to put it mildly, it did not go well. We ended up shutting the machine down and having some downtime because
Yeah.
the chemical reacted in a way we didn't expect, and it was then that I kind of learned the value of having a plan, but having a plan B and a plan C before you do that, because something unexpected is almost certain to happen, and you better have more than a plan than we need to
Yeah.
shut down for 8 hours and wash up. So
Yeah, and
that was
back.
a lesson in pre-planning.
Well, I think we just did a session for a client that really wants to increase their level of accountability, and it had
Hmm.
the term scenario planning in there, which is basically
Yeah.
what you're saying, the contingencies. It's like, what is the thing that could go wrong, and how, knowing if it did go very wrong, what your recovery plan or remediation might be. I think is it's a good lesson, because I'm sure when you were starting that change, you didn't think ahead maybe enough about what the negative consequence would be if something really did go wrong. And just so people know, in a paper mill, downtime is really expensive. Those minutes add up because, and in fact, if you've never seen a paper machine run, this blew me away when I toured the graphic facilities back in the day. It's like, now, again, this analogy people can't see, but when I looked at a paper machine, I looked at it like I used to see the film projectors back in school when they would play a movie, right? And the film goes up and down over all these rollers. And I remember even looking at a film projector saying, why does it have to go through all these rollers that add tension and things? But if you were to look at a paper machine, it really is a series of rollers where you're essentially imagine taking this pulp. And the wet end of a mill, by the way, is an experience everyone should have, especially in West Monroe, Louisiana, when it's 110 degrees outside. And at the wet end of the mill, I remember the crew took me back there on a tour, and they just wanted me to experience the kind of sweat that I've never experienced before when it's over 100, well, I guess it can't be more than 100% humidity, but it was like full humidity at 130 degrees. That's a great weight loss program to go to the wet end of the mill. But then you take that slurry and basically pass it through these various rollers, and out the other end comes either recycled carton board, like Graphic makes. It could be toilet paper in some other mills. So I just think it's really a cool process. So much can go wrong, and therefore, when that machine shuts down, it's really expensive. So yeah, that was a good and valuable and expensive lesson.
Yeah, and we use a scenario potential problem analysis (PPAs). Yeah, we've kind of formalized that in the division to help everybody look forward and say what could happen, and then make sure we've got contingencies ready to go if that happens.
Yeah. So when you think of, one thing that struck me, again, having worked at Graphic and certainly working with other companies since then, it's great to see these younger people come up through various channels. I know you probably also recruit some of your leaders from being process engineers, where they have a strong technical base. I'm wondering, well, maybe specifically around someone who's coming through that technical side, maybe on the engineering side, who's making the leap to some sort of production leader. Is there something that you've noticed that they need to be alert to as part of that journey?
Yeah, I think part of what they have to be aware of is, being technical roles, process engineers, they tend to be individual contributor roles, right?
Yeah.
And as you move up into supervising people, that's a whole lot more of a team sport, a full contact team sport, but still a team sport. And you have to. The model I've always tried to emulate and impart on people is servant leadership.
Yeah.
You have to be part of the team. You can't be sitting on top just barking orders and expecting people to follow through with that. They have to see that you care about them. They have to believe that you have some empathy for what's going on, that they have a voice, and that you can that when they have a problem, you can help fix their problems. That's how you gain the trust of that crew, of that team, and then once you have that trust, then you can be a leader. But you have to earn that first. Giving somebody a title doesn't infer leadership at all.
Yeah, you might. Well, actually, I think you'd probably agree that when you're first put in your position, this happened to me way back at General Motors when I was in my very early part of my career, is the people actually test you a little bit at that point, because there is this tendency, and of course the new leader is wanting to impress, and so they probably come out stronger than they need to, rather than just asking questions and listening really well, right?
Exactly.
So the team will test them, and eventually there is this kind of like, okay, this person is a good egg. They're being fair and reasonable. The other thing I think leaders need to probably be aware of is that pretty much everybody, there's always the odd exception, but pretty much everybody wants to do the right thing, wants to do what's right by the company and to its customers, and if they're not doing that, it's not because of malicious intent usually. And so I think you're making a good point, which is if you can harness the power of the people and their experience and their observations, you can really create a lot more success.
You absolutely can.
I wondered, Mike, one of the concepts I ran by you when we were in the development stages, and this was as we were creating this new plant manager excellence program that we have, is I ran by a model, and I'll just remind you of it. It was something called decision-making waste, essentially where we have people at more senior levels either making decisions or solving problems at either one or two levels lower. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I know at the time you said, oh yeah, definitely that it has existed, still probably exists. Do you have any comment on why? Because again, I don't blame people, because it's a natural thing that happens, and I just wondered if you had any observations about that.
No, and I see that with myself and on my team frequently. Is you get a bit of that adrenaline high of solving a problem, but then you're always having to solve that problem. You have to resist that temptation, and it's hard, and it takes work, and sometimes people have to call you out on it and say, hey, wait, your peers should be looking at the way you're doing that, and be able to say, hey, wait, look, you're in too deep, you need to pull back. And we try to do that with each other, on my team, because it's that important. If you don't push down that decision making, you're always having to make those decisions, right? So you've got to push that down. You've got to train your people, and look, sometimes they're going to make wrong decisions, but then you could just go back and have the conversation about what would you do different. Did you have a plan B and a plan C? And if you have those conversations early and often, you can generally avoid the big catastrophic failures. But you can use those as teaching moments all the way through their careers.
Yeah, for sure. I wondered, one situation we were in recently, and I hadn't heard it phrased this way, but I think you can relate to this, is I think some people think that accountability is me simply raising my hand and putting an issue out there, sort of I guess we would call it identifying and reporting an issue, but then kind of saying, I hope somebody does something with this. And it's too simple to say that you should own an issue right through to completion, because not every issue is your issue. But I'm just wondering whether, how you view accountability, because it kind of goes hand in hand with that empowerment. And it's not meant to punish, but it's sort of like this learning you go through around learning about accountability. Do you have any insights on that?
Oh, I certainly do. That's one of my favorite topics to talk about, actually, because accountability, most people, when they think about that, they think about punishment. They think it's a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, it can be very empowering and helpful to a person. But what you have to do, and I'll say this a lot, is early and often. If somebody's doing something that you don't like what they're doing, whether it's the output or whatever it is, right? If you have a conversation with them early about that, before it festers up inside of me until I get to the boiling point, right? Then they have a chance to do that. If you don't tell them they're doing something wrong, they're going to keep doing that, and you're going to get madder, and they're not even going to know that something's wrong. So those early and often interventions really make a difference in the way you can develop that relationship and improve that employee's output and give them the ownership of that. So that feedback is critical. Accountability doesn't necessarily mean writing somebody up or yelling at somebody. Just the opposite. In fact, it's making sure that they know what's expected of them, and then they give you those results all the time. And if they're not, then give them the fairness of that course correction. Only when you give them that course correction and they don't course correct, then you have to start escalating up the accountability scale.
Yeah.
But most times it's just a conversation. People just want to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we talk about just delivering feedback, we say it's not that most of us are getting like tons of high fives or even a lot of like, you need to fix this. Like, it's usually that we just live in a performance vacuum. So we're not told when we're doing really well or that we've created an impressive outcome. We're also not told that we're not doing very well.
Right.
And again, my colleague, Jason McKenzie, who's been on the podcast, but also he's my collaborator on this new Plant Manager Excellence program. Mm-hmm. He said, first of all, a leader's job is to relentlessly remove ambiguity, which I love, because it basically says we're probably the root of part of this problem is that we're not on the same page. So let's make sure we get on the same page. But he also talks about accountability gaps and overlaps. So a gap is, of course, where nobody clearly owns the issue or the problem. By the way, Mike, who do you think gets it if nobody owns it?
Right.
The plant manager or whoever's the more senior manager ends up with it. Then there's the overlaps where it seems like it's three different people who really own it, but nobody owns it because everybody owns it, sort of thing. So he said, and actually this really stumped a lot of the plant managers in our first cohort through the program, because they're like, yeah, there are these issues and it's not clear who's supposed to run with it. When you've run into that, how do you help resolve that with, again, the leaders who you might be coaching or overseeing?
Yeah, well, one example of that is just in our morning review meetings where we review the previous day's performance and then what's the follow-up items that have to come out of that. And one thing that we do is we've got an action item board listed in the conference room, and it goes, here's the date, here's the action item, and then the most important thing is the who and the what and when's it going to be done by. So there's always just one name on there, just to your point there, because if three people own it or nobody owns it, then it's not going to get done. So there's always a who, when's, the who, what is it, and when's it going to get done by that comes out of those meetings.
You must have learned that yourself, though, early on.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, time, date, and action is such a simple concept, and I admit that sometimes I still forget that. Like, what are we going to do by when? And I think people are afraid that, well, what if I guess wrong on the time frame, or I guess, it's okay. It's okay that you come back and say, hey, the more I dug into this, the more of an issue it was. Mm-hmm. As long as people know there's a plan, I think everyone's afraid of, well, I just don't want negative results. Well, hey, business is full of deviations from the goal. It's really just, does somebody recognize it and do something about it in a way that brings it back under control, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It can't be a penalty box. I mean, consistently, if you miss your deadlines, yes. But if you're late on something and you've got a good reason, and you come to me, in advance of that deadline and say, "Hey, Mike, I got a problem," then it's just fine.
Yeah, I again, having gone on to the back out on the road again and gone, and some of our clients will let us do we just call it a site visit. But at the site visit, I actually want to see from the first shift startup through the regular morning meetings where people are, reviewing results and talking about things. I just want to get a feel for the cadence. One thing I've noticed, and maybe you can comment on this, is there are so many KPIs, and often, I'm sure in your business, you've got different machines that are running in these factories, and often there are leaders who are designatedly, let's say, responsible for some of those assets. And I've noticed that, at these meetings, there'll be green. Obviously, there's green indicators, which are the, on target. There's red indicators. Sometimes there'll be yellow indicators. But I've also noticed that there's some siloing that kind of comes with that as long as my line or my shift is green, I'm cool. And somebody else is red, too bad for them. And I wondered, the more we measure, do you think that contributes to siloing? I mean, have you found anything that helps helps people realize that we have a common goal, like having one machine produce a lot and another machine not produce enough is really doesn't win at the end of the day?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very realistic thing. And as we've implemented KPIs at Graphic and in our mills, then one thing I've really noticed is you have to be careful because then we highlight all the reds. And
Yeah.
then so the meeting can get a negative tone to it because you're
Right.
only highlighting the stuff that went wrong
Right.
and forgetting about all the stuff that went right.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure there's a balance there. And then, certainly address the reds, but make sure we talk about the greens too.
Yeah.
But then make sure your metrics roll up so that everybody understands what a good day is and what's the scorecard. Were we safe?
Yeah.
Did we produce a quality product, and then did we produce the right amount of the product at the right cost? Right. So that's the overall facility goal, and then that works down to each of the departments.
Yeah.
But
So
we have to win as a team.
yeah, it's. I mean, I put this out there, and it's more of a probably an unachievable vision because you're never going to probably have everything running in the green, or if you do, it's going to be such a small fleeting of time that happens. I said, that it would be cool if there was metrics that everyone could agree are shared metrics, because I've noticed in support functions sometimes they'll have more activity-based KPIs, like how many work orders did we close off in maintenance, but then there's the bigger goal of like OEE targets, or like our job is really to collaborate with production to achieve the goals. I guess I got to watch it. I'm monologuing a little bit, but I'm curious. I'm curious what. How you've seen silos form, and in the places where you helped break down the silos or seen other people break down the silos, what helped do that?
Well, one area, and you pointed it out already, was this, typically maintenance and production are very siloed organizations. So what I like to do in my organization is the production manager has maintenance and operations report to them. So then it just eliminates the finger pointing. Not always, but in general, the operations manager has maintenance and production. So it doesn't matter why the machine's down, whether it's a mechanical issue or an operations issue. At the end of the day, we need that machine to run. We need to produce paper and safely, of course. But that just kind of eliminates. I don't care if it's a mechanical problem or we're all in this together kind of attitude. As one example.
Yeah, I like that, and I like that single point of accountability. But as you pointed out, you're still going to have a manager over the maintenance or over production, and they could still have some conflicts. But because they're jointly responsible for achieving the results to the person above them, that person at least can be a referee to that.
Right, and that's when I went to West Monroe. That was one of the things that I did immediately, and then we all sat at the same table. It didn't matter whose problem it was. We were all going to solve it together. And it's a little simplistic and a little pie in the sky, to simplify it like that. But at the end of the day, that's really what happened.
Well, even actually, I mean, earlier you mentioned servant leadership, which is, again, that the leader really is there to provide the resources, direction, clarification, so that teams can be on the right track, or at least have the highest chance of success.
Right.
I wondered with all the data. I mean, I mentioned at the start of the podcast, one of the new topics that we've had asked of, so we're developing it, is this idea of data-driven performance conversations, because you see metrics and data, but somebody has to do something with that to bring it back into control. There's so many metrics. I'm sure in your business you've got like thousands of different measures going on in a facility at any given time. What's your take on it? Have you seen people get like almost too focused on the metric, as if you're driving the car to the metric, but you're not realizing that there's other things going on below the surface? What's your take on that?
You can absolutely get paralyzed by the data and the sheer amount of data that's out there, right? So it always comes back to people. Did we do our rounds? Are we following our center lines? Did we achieve what we said we were going to get done yesterday, so that we can work on the new things today? So it's all the bottom line is it always comes down to people. Are we doing what we said we were going to do in an on time and efficient way to do it?
Well,
You got to bring it back to the people.
I love that though, because you're also saying if you go back to the fundamentals, it's sort of like I guess maybe the analogy
Oh,
is I can't be a sports coach and say, guys, here's the key to our success. We need to
mhm,
score more goals than those other guys. Okay, let's go get it. Right?
right.
It's always going to be around the fundamentals, and so I think it's great that when things appear to be complexified,
Mhm,
that you distill it back to the basics and go down to let's at least go back down to the basic things that
yeah,
we know either keep the process in control or start to cause variation, and go
yeah,
back to that first before we start getting all confused at this level with all the
yeah.
chop and the flutter. um,
Yeah, no question, Greg. At the end of the day, it's always about fundamentals. You have to execute the fundamentals, or you can't get any better.
yeah. I mean, you just are coming off this massive project, launching the Waco mill. I was curious, your insights, because that is something that draws a lot of attention, and I
Hmm.
wondered not only for you, but I'm sure lots of other people had their attention focused on that. And yet you have the daily operations running, in the background that make all the money, while you're spending it on this new mill.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what did you notice? Because this would have been a significant distraction, but a positive distraction. I'm just wondering how that got balanced with just running the business day to day.
Yeah, it was really about dividing and conquering, right? So having the right people in Waco that I had confidence on the day-to-day management, and then we'd have a weekly debrief and where we're at, and and all the all the metrics, and a more longer formal monthly meeting, and then occasionally I would go to site, but I we put really good people on that site and had to let them do their job because a lesson I learned when we started up our K2 machine here in Kalamazoo, I got way too deep into running this and kind of lost sight of the division for a minute.
Yeah.
And that was a lesson for me. And no, you can't do that. And certainly, as we were talking about bringing Waco online, I had to have that, keep that in front of me that the division has to run and Waco has to start up. So.
That's a really cool thing, and I think it's a great lesson for our audience to know that you will have these moments in your career when you're getting overly fixated on a project or an initiative, and it's not that it's not important, but
Right.
stepping back to make sure that you've empowered the right team to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, my colleague Jason just went to a session with Jim Collins, who again famously wrote "Good to Great," but he said, when you look at all the things that happen, having the right people in the right seats on the bus is still the most important thing. In fact, it was kind of cool, Mike. They actually looked and said, when they studied CEOs, they said, how many of them chose to either replace people or develop people. They said,
Mm-hmm.
actually, it turned out that it didn't really matter. Like, some were more biased to replace people who weren't working out, and others were more to development oriented. But it turned out that it was about fixating on getting the right people. However you did it. Now, you don't want to really do mass changes all
No,
the time because that's disruptive. But it's knowing that it's about the right people in the right positions.
I would tell you that's probably one of the single biggest things I had to learn in my career was how important that is, because when you get the right person in the right seat on the bus, on the right bus,
On the right bus.
it's unbelievable how much easier my job becomes.
Yeah.
And it's so hard when you don't have the right people in the right spot. And yeah, those are difficult decisions, and sometimes you can improve, and sometimes you have to replace. But either way, it's probably one of the most critical things I have to focus on right now.
Yeah. And I mean, we always think of the person who isn't working out that we ultimately have to change as being some sort of like catastrophe. It is a little bit, but the reality is for that person on their career journey, that just might be the stepping stone to something else where they can be really successful.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today, Mike, and I love chatting with you because you're very bright and you have both a good brain and a good heart, which is not easy for every executive to embrace. I just wondered if there's anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap up.
No, Greg, as I think through our conversation, I think we covered the majority of the highlights, and it's been a good conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I like that you, through your journey, you've had ups and downs like everybody has, and you've learned from them, as have I, and been running my business for 30 years. And I think if people know that it's not about perfection in your career, it's just really about sort of being able to process, learn, and change, and then know that even when you think you've figured it out, there's something else coming down the pipe that's going to cause you to be disrupted, and you just have to process that and do the best that you can. So I just want to say thanks, Mike, for being our guest on the podcast. Certainly, if people want to know more, you can search up graphic packaging. It's Graphic PKG is usually the website that you can go to. Michael Farrell is, of course, you can reach him on LinkedIn. He's actually very good about being on LinkedIn, so thanks for that, Mike, because not everyone does stay up to date on those things.
Sure.
And again, for our audience, I just want to say thank you for investing your time. Of course, podcasts can be these little hidden gems, and the only way that they get discovered by other folks is when you go about sharing them. And most of the ways you can do that is just sending a link to somebody else. And the other way you can do it, even though it requires a little bit of effort, is to go on your favorite podcasting app and just write a comment and give it a 4 or 5 star review. That's how shows like this get known. So right now, I'll just wish our audience well on your leadership journey. And if we can be of any assistance, of course, reach out to us at our website, uniquedevelopment.com.